Hey everybody, welcome back to Feedback Loop. I'm Joey,
And I'm Jeremy.
and we're back. We're back at you after what's 3 weeks? Has it been 3 weeks, 2 weeks?
I don't know.
Whatever it's
You,
been.
you'd think I would know. It's only been a couple weeks. It hasn't been
Yeah.
too long.
Okay. Yeah, it
Just
hasn't been
long
too
enough.
long. But if you're an avid listener, at the end of our last episode for Rainbow Kitten Surprise, we dropped a bomb. Let you all know that we were going to be shifting some things, changing the format a little bit, and it'd take a bit of time for us to figure that out. Well, I
The
won't say
time
we
has
figured
come.
it. Yeah, I won't say we figured it out, but we're here.
We're working
So
on it. We're trying some shit out. Trying to make it a more natural listening experience, a more
yeah,
natural conversational flow, I suppose, to things, and less work.
yeah,
Frankly,
yeah,
less tedious note taking. So hopefully this works for you guys, and hopefully I guess it works for us.
yeah.
With that said, this week we are going to be trying out new format. This I think this episode specifically might be even different from our quote unquote new normal. In which first we're going to talk about how we discover music, what our rituals are, where we're at, what we're doing, just kind of what that experience is. I don't have any notes written down for mine, but most of the time, at least in recent, I want to say very recent history, within the last year, 2 years, maybe since about the podcast, not related, I don't think, but definitely not in the last 2 years. Recent history, I've been mostly listening to music in the shower when I wake up. When I take a
Nice.
shower, I'll listen to music. I'll put on an album and just kind of vibe in the shower when I'm waking up, and that is not good for me. I mean, it is good. I love doing it. I'm not going to
Yeah,
stop doing that. But previously, I feel like I was more into finding music when I'm doing something else, like working, just like throughout the day, having music on was kind of something that I've moved away from, and I'm not happy about it.
yeah.
So part of me wanting to talk about this is to maybe have some inspiration for me to get back into things. I think you probably have a better way of handling it, but a lot of the music that I listen to now is just when I'm in the shower. I'll listen to something new, and I don't. I do some discovery on my own. Like if I go for a drive somewhere, then I'll put on some new music or something as well, which is a very great headspace. I think we both like driving and
Oh
listening
yeah.
to music. So how do you typically get into your new music discovery mode?
So I guess whenever I'm trying to discover things, uh, I'd say a pretty common way is since I use Spotify a whole lot, they do recommend, like, if you're listening to an artist, there's like recommended bands you might like. And usually I've heard of all of them, but usually I can get kind of down like a click hole where I click a band
Yeah,
that's like, if you like this band, you'll like this band. I click that band, and then maybe like 3 or 4 layers deep, I start to find bands that I had never heard of or something. And sometimes I like them, sometimes I don't, but it's always
yeah. I mean
a
that's part
good
of the
way.
discovery, right?
Yeah.
So you're pretty actively digging for music when you're in those kind of moods. You're clicking through and clicking and clicking and clicking, as opposed to, I guess, putting on a shuffle of like a discovery playlist or like a band radio station or something.
Yeah, I don't know why, but I've never been about discovery, like just like putting on shuffle, cuz I mean Spotify does that too. I know,
It's
like,
curated, right?
yeah, like Pandora and stuff do that too if you use Pandora. I mean, I'm sure any
Does
music
Pandora
streaming
still
service.
exist?
Yeah, it does. My dad uses it. He swears by Pandora. I think he pays for premium too.
Wow,
Like, yeah, but I,
interesting.
I'm I've never. I like to have my hand in it, which is like the other ways that I discover new music. One that I've kind of gotten away from because they don't make the videos as much anymore. But Amoeba Records, they used to have well, still do, I guess, have a YouTube series, What's in My Bag, where they invite a musician
Yeah.
in, or I don't know if they invite them or if they just show up and they're like, "Hey, let's do this." But I feel like they
Yeah,
have
it's
to invite
probably
them.
there's probably a conversation, a meeting happens beforehand to
Yeah,
figure out
they
when and where
they
and
got to
whatnot.
hash out the details, call the agents, all that.
Right. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, I like to do those. The musician goes and searches through this big record store, and they make these picks, and then afterwards they interview him like, "Oh, you picked this album. Why'd you pick this album?" And they explain kind of like, "Oh, this is my influence, or this is what I've been listening to right now." And I feel like it helps to have somebody like a trusted musician that I know I like their music, so maybe whatever they're listening to I
Yeah.
think is cool as well.
I feel like that's a very interesting way to find new music, because you have that touch point of like, okay, I know this musician, I like this musician, and then you're finding out maybe not necessarily what inspires them, but in a lot of those cases they are like, oh yeah, I have history with this album. This
Yeah,
album has inspired me to make these songs, or this kind of adjustment. But there's also a lot of times they'll pick up new music and modern music and stuff, so you can kind of I feel like in some way I might have an issue with that, in that you're only discovering new music from what somebody else is telling you, and you're kind of like limiting yourself. I guess you're putting on
yeah,
blinders and saying that I want to listen to things that my favorite artists listen to, which
yeah,
might not be what you actually enjoy. But yeah, I feel like there's a lot of personality to that series. And on that note, that's another way that I typically stumble into music nowadays is YouTube.
yeah.
YouTube videos. I get recommended music videos and shit. And if the thumbnail's interesting enough, or if the song title or the band title, if there's something that sticks out, I'll click on it and listen
Yeah.
to it. And I'm also subscribed to like Napalm Records. They post a lot of weird metal shit that
Oh yeah.
I don't know. I guess they sign everyone, but they have a ton of music that they're posting on a regular basis. So every few days or something, I'll go and I'll listen to one, or if something seems interesting. Speaking of which, I guess kind of not we don't necessarily have to move on,
Yep.
but one recently that we both have listened to that is on my list of albums I've been listening to is Black Country New Roads' new album, Ants from Up There,
Oh yeah.
which is something I found because of a music video thumbnail. I clicked on it because there was a weird alien for the song Concord. And then I recommended it to you, and you seem to really enjoy it as well. I haven't gone back to listen to it a whole lot. I have listened to it a few times since then, but that's one of the big things I've been listening to recently.
Yeah, same here. Like, and I think that's going to be one of those big albums, like
Yeah,
at least in its space. Like I think it's going to be big if it's not already. I'm not too plugged into like the music scene or anything. I'm pretty
right.
far from it. But yeah, as soon as I listen to that, it's so it's just got such a cool sound. Like it's like the indie rock, but there's also like clarinets or saxophones and
Yeah.
strings and all this other cool stuff. And there were just as soon as I listened to Concord, whenever you posted it, I was like, oh, I gotta listen to the rest of
Yeah,
this, and
right? Like
it was
Concord
good.
is a great single
Yeah,
for that album, and it's not necessarily indicative of every song on that album, but it's got that hook. There's something about it that's just like meaningful
yeah,
to it, and it definitely caught my ear, and I'm glad that it caught your ear.
oh yeah.
Uh, in an inverse way, something else that I've been listening to in the past week, I guess this past weekend specifically, I dipped my toe a little bit deeper into the pile hole.
Did you now?
I did, and I knew you'd be
Okay,
happy about that
that's
because
cool.
you're all in on Pile
Oh
at
yeah,
this point. They're
yeah.
like your biggest, your number one right now.
Right now, yeah,
Current
definitely.
is Pile. So I listened through Songs Known Together Alone in
Okay,
full, and I really enjoyed it
yeah,
in the vacuum. I know previously I had tried, but I wasn't too keen on it because we had just done Green and Gray,
yeah,
and it was such a different sound. But going back from like after having that break, going back to that was great. I enjoyed that album, and I also actually listened to In the Corners of a Sphere Filled Room,
oh hell yeah,
which was more like ambient stuff and backgroundy. So I don't have a lot to say about that, but it was good background music.
yeah, definitely. That's one of the in case people don't know, that was kind of like their jam session album that they came out with in 2021, and I mean, yeah, it's just super cool sounds. Uh, much like you, I mean, I guess this isn't new music, but if we're talking about things that we've been listening to recently, I
Yeah,
have, of course, been listening to a bunch of Pile,
yeah.
but I've kind of found myself. The first album that I listened to them was their 2015 album. Uh, God,
Is that a hair shirt of purpose?
no, it's the one
That's the only
before
one I
that,
recognize by name.
but I
Don't worry about it.
cannot think of it like the name of it for the life of me. But I've
You're
kind of
better than this.
You're better than this. Yes, that's what it is. Thank you.
Yep.
But I kind of stayed in like 2015, they had that album. Then 2017, Hair Shirt of Purpose. Then 2018, they had Odds and Ends, which is like reworks of other stuff. Then in 2019, they had, of course, Green and Gray. I kind of stayed in that era for a while. and I've been really pushing myself to like dive deeply into their older stuff. And I've been listening to a bunch of like Magic is
So
Real.
does it hold up?
Oh, it does. It's harsher. It's more intense, I'd say, where they kind of like get the shoegazy mellow sound later.
Yeah.
They have a harsher sound.
Interesting.
And there's an album, Jerk Routine, that, I mean, a lot of it's just Rick McGuire doing his thing, but of course, but Magic is Real is great. But yeah, and then, uh, man, since you were talking about Black Country New Road, you also turned me on to Zeal and Ardor. I figured I
Oh
had to
yeah.
throw that on here because I listened to that a few times after we were playing Borderlands, and he was like, "Yeah, man, I listened to that album and it was a wild ride." And then I started listening to it, and I was like, "Oh yeah, this is a fucking wild ride."
Yeah, that was
Like,
a good rec from my friend in Canada. Shout out to you, Canadian friend. I'm not going to use your name just in
nice.
case, but I do. She's real. She's a real person. My totally real friend in Canada.
Yeah, my girlfriend goes to another high school, man.
Yeah, exactly, exactly like that. But yeah, that was a cool little discovery. I haven't gone back to that since either, but that was fun. Also, I have three more points, I guess, three more points of music that I've been hitting on, two of which are new albums. One of which I went back and revisited Radiohead's In Rainbows.
Hmm.
I've never dove into Radiohead, but I listened to In Rainbows. I think last year was the first time me listening to it. I think I mentioned it to you at the time.
Yeah.
But I recently listened to that album again, and I think this is something that it's also on my intentions for next episode. However frequently we're doing this, we never talked about it nailed down.
Yeah.
But between now and then, I want to listen to more Radiohead albums and stuff. So that'll be cool. In Rainbows, I really enjoy that album.
That totally blows my mind because I really wanted to. I've listened to Kid A
Mm-hmm.
like once. I think part of my homework for myself at least was listening to Kid A few more times in the near future.
Hell yeah,
But yeah,
we're gonna be some
um,
Radiohead boys maybe.
hell yeah, we'll be sad. Is that sad boy music? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't
It's
know.
not.
It's
It,
it's it's music.
it's emotional music. There we go.
Yeah, feel music.
But shit, man, I also had a pretty cool moment that I guess I'll share in the name of discovery.
Yeah,
I and like you mentioned liking to listen to music while you work, I also whenever I get like super heads down, there's times where my work is just a fucking joke and I don't have to
yeah,
do a whole lot of stuff, but whenever I'm really working, I just it's it's imperative that I listen to music. And on my team, one of the person that I'm working with a project on was like asking for music, and I had coincidentally, I guess this ties into another way that I discover music, which is YouTube. There's a specific YouTube channel called Vapor Memory,
mm,
and as their name would suggest, they are in the vaporwave sphere and other wave spheres. But they had a post about a new-ish Haircuts for Men EP, and Haircuts for Men is like a sample heavy vaporwave chill type
yeah,
music, and I recommended that because I listened to it. I had never heard it. I listened to it and I loved it. I recommended that to her, and she was just like called me out in a fucking meeting. It was like, that was a good recommendation. And I was like, oh my god, am I doing my job? Like, this is my
yeah.
podcast job. It's great.
No, you shared that as well in our Discord, and I gave it a shot, and yeah, that was a spot on recommendation. I think I would also recommend is I don't know if you shared the same one to me that you did to them, but you shared there are people that you will never see again,
Yeah.
and that's the
Man,
one that I listened to, and that's 10 out of 10 recommendation.
yeah, I mean the fucking title is what got me as soon as they posted it. Because I mean, I like Haircuts for Men. I like all of the stuff that I've ever heard by them, which is I think only like 3 EPs, which they have a ton. They put out so much music, and
Yeah,
the thing is, since they're so sample heavy, they get taken down on YouTube a lot. So it's like I
when
don't
you see
even
something, you have to do it now.
yeah. So like I listened to it and I was just like, yeah, this is super cool. But in return, she also recommended me an artist called Naji, I think is how you pronounce it, which was super cool. It was like R&B. I don't want to say funk because it wasn't quite funk or anything, but it was like he was just a really good like guitar. Like there was a lot of good guitar. I guess he plays saxophone.
Yeah,
I'm guessing that's his instrument. I don't. judging by the album cover of what I listened to, it was like Tokyo something was the name of it. I can't find it
Was it
right
Tokyo
now.
Blue, or is that a different album?
It might have been Tokyo Blue, but
It is Tokyo Blue.
okay, cool.
Confirmed.
But yeah, I listened to it and it made me want to listen to Japanese city funk. Like it made me go back and listen to a band called Cassiopeia. They have I guess it's a collections album. They have Mint Jams 1 and 2, and I listened to those again. And
That's exciting.
it's
I haven't
it's
listened to a lot of, I guess, more contemporary. I don't think that's the right word. Just Japanese music, like you mentioned, Japanese city music. I've listened to some Japanese jazz. I think I listened to some when I went on my road trip last year, and it was
nice.
phenomenal. Just like some nice, like chill summer vibes from that stuff. And of course, I've listened to like some J-pop. I listened to baby metal, but like as far as more like I guess reasonable, rational, just like everyday music from Japanese artists, I haven't listened to a whole lot of that. So that's kind of cool. Maybe I need to dip into that a bit.
Dude, it's super cool. Like there's I mean, I feel like I can't remember any of their names right now because like in
Of
the
course.
way like I mean, I don't want to sound bad, but I have a hard enough time remembering like American names. It's
Mhm.
hard to
Oh no, for
remember
sure.
like people like famous Japanese musicians names that
Yeah,
aren't in my everyday lexicon. Like and I would just
right.
butcher them if I tried to say them here. But yeah,
For sure.
it's there's a lot of good shit over there for sure.
Yeah, I mean, we talked not to stereotype, I suppose, but we listened to Fisherman's Long Journey at the
Yeah,
beginning of last year. That was a fun time.
that's some
That
good
was
dream pop
I
or
don't that was
rock,
so
whatever it
long
is.
ago, man.
Yeah.
So long ago. This podcast is almost 2 years old now. It's
This
fucking
podcast started pre-pandemic, so that's just a weird thought.
yeah. That is a weird thought. But I instead of listening to Japanese music recently, this is one of the final two new albums that I've been listening to, and this is something that's been brewing for a little bit for me. There's a band called Bloodywood, and
Ooh,
they make Indian folk metal, but it's like new metal with like a
what?
lot of traditional Indian folk instruments, and it is so good. They just released their debut album called Rakshak on Friday, and I found this through kind of a YouTube game that I was playing with one of my friends. We were up late one time and we were talking about just foreign metal, and we were googling, like searching on YouTube for just different foreign ethnicities and metal from those areas or whatever. And I think he sent it to me or I sent it to him. I don't know. It was the lead single from the album, called Gadar, I think. And boy, it slaps. It hooked me instantly. I'm like, I'm into this. It's kind of got some new metal vibes, but there's a lot of like modern, like kind of grindy chugging. And then there's a lot of like traditional Indian folk instruments, and it blends so well together. I will say, I think some of the rapped parts is a little bit cringy because so most of the singing, quote unquote, is done in their native language, but the rap parts are sung in English typically. And it kind of, in the way that new metal is, when you have someone that's rapping, and it feels more like they're trying to be cool or trying to fit
Yeah,
into the rap coolness, like Mike Shinoda, kind of back in some of the early Linkin Park stuff. It's a
yeah.
little cringy and hard to listen to. Not hard to listen to. I don't want to say that because I enjoy it a lot. But that's a rec that I think you might be interested in. Is Bloody Wood, their new album Rock Shock that just came out. I've been listening to that a lot.
Well, I am definitely going to be fucking listening to that. I just pulled it up, and the fact that there's just some giant ass elephant on the album cover,
It's a pretty cool album. It's a fun
I'm
sound,
about
and they're
that.
a new band. Like this is their first studio album, so
Well,
get it
that's
while it's
cool.
hot.
Yeah, I like being on the cusp of new bands. That's always a fun feeling.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of the music that I tend to discover nowadays is because of new albums being released, not necessarily by new artists only, but I tend to find more new music, and I guess that's part of that's just how YouTube works, right? If something is new and fresh and it's blowing up, then they'll recommend it to more people or whatever. But I think that's kind of where we differ, is that you tend to dive back into history, and find bands that are lesser known, whereas I mostly just filter in what's new. One of the
Yeah.
other new albums, the last one that I have on my list that I wanted to talk about, is the new Oliver Tree album. Also came out on Friday. His first album was one of my favorite albums of 2020, but his new album, Cowboy Tears, just dropped, and it is so interesting. I don't want to say the album's interesting or uninteresting, but the way I experienced it was kind of weird in that, like, I wasn't looking forward to it necessarily. I'd heard some of the singles, and they were fine, but it didn't sound like his first album, and it didn't feel like it was capturing the same energy. And so the first listen through it, I wasn't totally impressed. I wasn't really like blown away or anything, but it was passable. I had no desire necessarily to consider it as a good album, quote unquote,
Yeah.
by my standards. But then I listened to it again and again and again, and the more I listen to it, the better it gets. And I'm just like, man, I kind of get it now. I'm kind of in. I still don't think it's as good as his first album, which is maybe a hipstery thing to say, but it takes his sound in a different direction, and so, there are some very very good songs that I enjoy on that album, and then some of them that I don't really care about. But that might be worth checking out as well.
Well, I really liked Ugly is Beautiful, so maybe
Yeah,
maybe
I,
I'll
I
give it a few
really really like
shots.
that album.
Yeah, that was
But
a
yeah,
really good
yeah,
album.
it was one of those things where, and this happens occasionally with a band. I don't know if it's happened to somebody that's as new as Oliver Tree for me, but where your first introduction to the band you're not really crazy, or the album you're not really like feeling, you're not vibing with, but then the more you listen to it, you kind of pick up on more things and it starts to make sense, and it kind of
Yeah,
grows on you.
I feel that. Surprisingly, that happened to me with Nana Grizzle on like every new album they had. I was like, this isn't gonna be as good as the last album, and then
Yeah.
I listened to it, and I'm like, this isn't as good as the last album. Then I listened to it 50 more times, and I'm like, this is my new favorite album. I fucking love this album.
Yeah, that happened with Humans by Gorillaz actually for me. I
Oh
wasn't
shit.
like, I feel like there was a lot of like controversy, I suppose, about that album in general. Well, not like political controversy or anything, but just like a lot of core Gorillaz fans were unimpressed with Humans.
Yeah.
And I think it got a lot of bad publicity from that, from like word of mouth, and maybe that was part of it. But yeah, when it came out, there were a couple good singles on it. Obviously, I loved them, but I kind of felt like the album as a whole wasn't great. And then the more I listened to it, I think that might be one of my favorite, like, top 3 Gorillaz albums, I think, for me
Well,
now,
shit,
which is pretty
man.
good praise. I really enjoy that album.
Yeah. Well, maybe I'll revisit it then because I wouldn't put it in my top three. But
Yeah, I don't think
oh.
you will, but I think I wonder how it feels now, just like with the state of the world going being what it is, and how that album kind of ties, because it kind of had this end of the world kind of vibe to it with their storytelling aspects of it. But I don't know, pretty cool album.
Yeah,
Recommend it.
he was predicting the end of the world, I guess.
Yeah, something like that. I mean, it was
Um,
kind of Demon Daisy
yeah,
in that aspect.
I loved Demon Days, but you know, we've spent all this time talking about what we've been listening to. I guess another factor in this is we're gonna try to incorporate, like, I don't know. Before we were like, next week we're gonna be hitting at you with this album, and we're gonna be talking about
Yeah,
this album. We're
something to look forward to.
Yeah, we're gonna kind of try to keep it more on our like natural musical discovery because we have things that we want to listen to, not just things that we're gonna tell each other
Right.
we have to listen to this like next week.
Yeah, yeah.
But I don't know, some things that I'm looking forward to is there's I can't think of his actual name, but he was in a band, The Microphones, and he is mostly the sole person of another band, Mount Erie, uh, who had one of the most crushing albums I've ever heard with Mount Erie called A Crow Looked at Me. It was just an extremely intense emotional ride. And I've listened to The Glow Part 2 by The Microphone. So I've listened to one album from like each of his bands, and I'm going to dive more into that.
Okay.
They're
Okay.
a really indie type vibe. I don't know. Like, I guess I could equate them, if I could equate them to any thing that we've listened to on the podcast, it would be more in the line of like Elephant Six, but not necessarily as upbeat. More indie than that stuff.
Hmm.
More self driven and folky, I guess. Another thing was I wanted to get into this band called Boards of Canada because I heard they were really good, and they're like old, not old, they're from the 90s, but like electronic type music, but more spacey. So there's an album, Music Has the Right to Children, that I think I'm going to try out.
Do it, man. Report back, maybe, if you
Maybe
do.
I will. If it's
really
good, I might.
As far as my intentions for the next period of time between episodes, more Radiohead. Kind of already touched on that. There's a band called Mazzy Star that I recently found out about that I'd never heard of somehow, and I kind of want to. I heard one song by them, and I kind of want to dive in to that because I kind of liked the vibes that I was getting from it. And then I had two other bands that were recommended to me by the same friend in Canada, who apparently has good recs. One of which is a band called My Dying Bride, and then another is called The Reticent. So those are on my list of to dos this period in the near future. So maybe I'll follow up on some of those next week. In that, I guess, spirit, let us know what you guys think of our recs. If you guys have been listening to stuff, let us know what that is in the comments, and tweet us some recommendations, and maybe we'll get around to listening to them and talking about them someday. Anything else you need to say in this new format, Joseph?
Fuck, dude. I don't know. Like, since we're not doing a whole like review thing anymore, just open season in the fucking any sort of forum, like comments or sections of wherever we put these. If you just want to discuss music, if you have thoughts on what we talked about, if you don't even have thoughts, but you're just like, okay, I can recognize this is a free space for me to be able to share what I've been listening to. Fucking do that, dude. It doesn't even have to be a rec. Just talk about it. It's fine.
Absolutely. That's what we're here for. That's hopefully the more natural direction we're going towards. Is just kind of talking about music and talking about our journeys through music, and kind of sharing what we've been hitting up and seeing, bouncing it off of each other, I suppose. So you guys do those things that Joey said. We're on all the social media stuff, so you can find a place, and maybe we'll. No, I'm not gonna say that. I was gonna tempt fate and say that maybe we're gonna do something, but I don't wanna commit to that at this point. Just stay at our feedback loop.